A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you, O Lord. A leper came to Jesus, and kneeling down begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it, be made clean." But leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then, warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See that you tell no one anything, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad, so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Typically, on Sundays, we hear a first reading and a gospel that are very much related. And they have a similar message, a similar theme, a similar topic. Some underlying connection exists between the first reading and the first reading and the gospel reading on Sundays. And that is very, very true today. From the first reading we hear from the book of Leviticus, and the gospel reading we hear out of the first chapter of the Gospel of Mark. Where this might be one of the easiest weekends to see, to decipher, to discern what is the connection between the first reading and the gospel. And that message, that theme, that topic is leprosy. And we hear in the book of Leviticus, the book of the rules, where all the rules are laid out for the Jewish people. And even for some of us, it talks about leprosy and what you're supposed to do. What you're supposed to do if you suspect you have leprosy. If there's a possibility that you might have leprosy, this is what you ought to do. If you do have leprosy, this is what you ought to do. So we hear that all about leprosy in the first reading. It's all about the rules and regulations pertaining to leprosy. And in the gospel reading, Jesus encounters a man, a person with leprosy. So what is this leprosy that is talked about in the first reading and the gospel reading this Sunday? Well, leprosy, as is evident in the readings, existed both at the time of Jesus and at the time of Moses, many, many years before Christ, before Jesus. But in our own society today, you really don't hear about leprosy. For some of us, we might not even know what leprosy is, because leprosy is a thing of the past. We've kind of moved on as a society from leprosy. But it was very evident, very, very present in the time of Jesus and in the time of Moses and Aaron back in the Old Testament. And we hear about leprosy a lot in the Gospels, different lepers whom Jesus is encountering as he performs his public ministry. But leprosy is simply a disease of the skin. The largest organ in the human body is the skin. And this disease, leprosy, just deteriorates and eats up the skin and produces holes and blisters and scales and marks on the skin. And it's very difficult to look at. And sometimes the skin is just eaten away. And it's just a difficult disease for the skin, this leprosy. And I know I personally can relate, not that it's on the same level, but here we are in the winter months. And the weather is very cold outside. And what happens, especially this year when we're washing our hands a lot, just drying out the hands, and you got the dry skin. Maybe some of us have dry lips all the time. We gotta relate to what it's like, in a way, to have leprosy, to have the skin just flaking off and starting to bleed at different places. I know for me, every winter, no matter how much lotion I use, no matter how much moisturizer I use, it still happens every winter at some point or another when the skin just breaks open and starts to bleed a little bit. And maybe you can relate too. that is a little bit of a foretaste of leprosy. It's not a foretaste of leprosy, but that is, in a way, how we can envision what leprosy is like. But just imagine that, whether it's your fingers, your hand, or your lips, whatever, it gets really chapped and really flaky and really dry skin. Just imagine that on your whole body, everywhere you have skin. And that's what leprosy is like. And then the worst part of leprosy, it wasn't bad enough that your skin is falling off and flaking off and bleeding and there's sores and blisters and all these things, then you couldn't be around anybody. Because leprosy was highly, highly contagious. It was simply touching someone with leprosy. You mean just brushing up against them, you'd immediately contract the disease. And that's why Moses urges the people, when the Lord, through Moses, urges the people, when talking about the rules regarding leprosy in the first reading, the last line of the gospel talks about, the leper shall dwell apart, making his abode outside the camp. Lepers were supposed to be away from society, away from people. And we hear throughout the gospel reading today how they have to cry out, unclean, unclean, if they're getting in the vicinity of people. If they're getting close enough to people, they have to alert the people, I am a leper, I have this highly contagious disease, get away from me. And we can kind of relate to that again in our own world today with this highly contagious disease that is spreading and causing this global pandemic. Although it's not on the same scale as leprosy, although the end is near and it's not a condition of the skin, it's still very dangerous. When you have this disease out there and you know someone who's contracted it, what do? We contact trace. And we figure out, was I in the vicinity of that person? Was I close enough to contract COVID-19? Is it possible that I now am sick or infected, whether that be asymptomatic or symptomatic? We're going through the same kind of things today, in a sense, where we want to stay away from people. We want to take extra precautions. We want to protect those who are most vulnerable. Just like the Lord urges those with leprosy. And it became the norm of society, but they were to be outsiders, outcasts. And they were to be away from people just so they didn't spread this highly contagious disease. But knowing this about leprosy, that's what makes the gospel reading so profound. That's what makes Jesus so rebellious, in a sense, is the fact that he has the audacity, he has the courage to reach out and touch this leper. Because most of Jesus' healings, he performs by touching the person, or being touched. Whether the person reaches out and touches him, or he touches the person. We hear about that even with Malchus's ear on Holy Thursday night. We hear that with the lepers. Jesus touches them. And Jesus touches Simon Peter's mother-in-law, and the fever is driven away from her. So in a lot of instances, Jesus has to touch someone to perform the healing. That's his method of healing, is through touch. And he doesn't shy away from this philosophy when encountering a leper. And we hear that in today's gospel reading. It says very specifically, word for word, moved with pity, he, that's Jesus, stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, be made clean. He touched him. Mark very much wanted to include that in his gospel to show how radical Jesus was in a sense. But he had the audacity to touch this leper without fear of contracting the disease of leprosy, because he knew how powerful he was, that he could cure this disease from this man, even if he had to touch a person infected with a highly contagious disease. I mentioned that leprosy isn't around nowadays, and we have our own illnesses to worry about, and especially there's been the major illness we've had to worry about for the past year and a half. For the past year. However long it's been around our part of the world or the country. But some remnants of leprosy remain. The philosophy, the utterance of God in the first reading, through Moses and through the people, saying, they shall be away, they shall be outsiders, they shall be shunned, they shall live and make their abode outside the camp. That happens still in our own society. And I'm not talking about sicknesses or highly contagious diseases or anything about nature. Not even talking about the pandemic at all. But in general, in society, we have people who are outcasts, who are living alone and outside of society. There are people who don't have human interaction. They don't have friends. We all probably encounter those people. There's people who just sit alone at lunch, whether it's school or at work. Those people who have no one to talk to. Those people, it seems like no one appreciates them, or no one even notices that they're there. We have, in our own day and age, some people with leprosy, figurative leprosy. Maybe because of their personality, or their appearance, or the way they talk, or the way they eat, or the way they walk, or the way they dress, for a variety of things, however they look or sound, it doesn't matter. What we have to do is be like Jesus and reach out to these people, to touch them. Whether that's figuratively or literally. Most likely it's going to be figuratively, where we reach out to that person. We reach out, we send them a message. Maybe an email. Maybe reach out to them on social media. Maybe we call that person, or FaceTime, or Skype, or Zoom. However it is that we communicate with them. Or send them a letter. However we can reach out. Or even to physically, literally reach out to that person in need. They're in need. They're in need of some human interaction. They're in need of a friend. They're in need of someone to talk to. They're in need of someone to reach out. Free of fear of the consequence, of the ridicule that you might receive from reaching out to that person, that outcast of society. The person who no one else is talking to. It can be difficult to reach out. It was probably difficult for Jesus to reach out to this leper, because of the reaction of the people would have probably been very concerning. Now Jesus has leprosy. What are we going to do? We got to stay away from Jesus now. Jesus is going to be unclean. And Jesus himself, although he knew he had power over the disease, he might have worried a little bit. He might have worried, what if it backfires? What if I become sick? But Jesus, without any fear, without any hesitation, without worrying about what other people thought, worrying about his own reputation, which that would obviously improve, as we hear in the gospel reading, his fame just spread. But Jesus reached out, not worried about what other people felt and thought of him. We have to have that same courage. We have to have that same audacity when we are reaching out to those in need. To the poor, to the marginalized, to the vulnerable, to the outcasts of society. Whatever is hindering them from having these human interactions, from having these friends, from having these conversations. Whatever it is, we can probably think of someone in our own life who needs that touch, who needs to feel that reaching out, so that we don't treat them like lepers. We don't treat them as outsiders, as people on the outskirts of society. So let's reach out. As we near the beginning of Lent, which begins this Wednesday, with Ash Wednesday, we always hear about the things that we can give up for Lent, but there are also things that we can do to add on to our lives, to give up our time in order to do these other things, these other prayer practices, helping others in need, and whatever it is we might do for Lent. If you're looking for a good Lenten resolution, reach out to someone in need. It doesn't have to be a big gesture. It doesn't have to be spending hours with them in conversation, but that's always nice. But just a little hello, a little acknowledgement, a little wink. I guess we can't smile anymore. People can't see us smiling, but a little wink, a little head nod. Anything that we can do to reach out, regardless of how we might feel about it, how we might be worried, what other people might think about us, whatever it is, let's reach out. Let's be like Jesus and reach out to those in need, to the lepers of our society and our world. And let's not treat them like lepers. Let's not treat them as outsiders. Because just like Jesus, we're called to reach out and to touch and to cure any loneliness, any depression, any despair, any isolation that anyone might be feeling. And that is our mission as disciples of Jesus, is to be like Jesus. And let's be like Jesus and reach out to those in need. Reach out to those who are alone and isolated and might themselves feel like people with leprosy.